was a time when my husband enrolled me in this, because I had managed to learn a bunch of languages, and nobody particularly had paid attention to it. But I actually competed in this with 9. I was afraid to do Japanese at the time and something else. Today I would compete with 19. But that was, the years later. What happened is I worked at the World Bank for 27 years. And the languages I know, and I say at least at the intermediate level and above. I do not list the 3 or 4 others that I know at the more elementary level, because I need to be able to operate at a professional level, be able to discuss educational issues with fluency, read the textbooks of the students, be able to follow a classroom, not small stuff. And I keep doing it. I'm 65 years old. And sorry my classmates were here today. And the last language I learned was Malagash, always for work, I used it last in January. And I learned it and started learning it in May. We all can continue doing that to the age of 110 or whatever it is that, our genes or gods give us. But we need to think about how memory operates in all of these things. Again, what I had to do with the conglomeration of languages I learned are completely contingent on what the work requires. There was testing to do in Madagascar, so I had to do that. You all hear all kinds of theories, and you see so many of these displayed here. We see the various language methodologies, and you've heard and you will hear a lot of this material. And they're completely contradictory. Don't translate, just listen and absorb. Or hear texts, all the texts are at normal speed. Learn like a child, use implicit memory, Malagash sa pen, without any efforts. It's not possible. And and we all know some of this stuff is marketing, but then what is truth and what is not? How to judge the marketing, pitches. Also, how to select material. There is Ellen, hi. Ellen, Jobin, who presented me this wonderful presentation this morning about the zillions of material. We need to be a little bit better informed, and I'm going to give you the principles of memory in order to be better informed about this. Because it's memory basics, basically, that tell us some things, and they are counterintuitive. They're not always what you would expect to know. To begin with, memory arose for evolutionary reasons. Memory arose basically to enable bugs to remember where they ate and keep them from danger. And the rest of us too, the higher level animals. So it's weird, but we have to piggyback on a system for education on a system that was never meant for that. And we have to do very weird leaps and bounds to do these kinds of things. And memory, you will keep hearing the word implicitly, very grossly has these 2 types. Anybody who wants, by the way, the research and the background on this, you send me emails and I'm happy to do. We have the conscious memory, declarative. What the rules are that we know, that, Ouagadougou is the capital of Burkina Faso, for example, or what we remember. And then we have the non-declarative, implicit memory, which has motor skills, has what primes you to remember the correct words, has these associations, for example. Very important is, we in school use a whole lot of the semantic memory, which we need as high-thinking human beings. But a whole lot of the language gets learned in the implicit memory mode. The grammar, for example, sits in the cerebellum of all places. And the point is, there seem to be easier ways to put this material into our memory, but the research is not terribly good. A number of the methods and theories of people, sometimes they get closer to the truth, sometimes not. We don't have very good research, but a lot of people declare themselves, this is what you will do, this is what you will get, and it's not quite right. This morning we heard from a discussion, some of you there from Professor Kelly, on whether the children, whether there is a critical period. There is clearly a sensitive period for learning language, vocabulary, and grammar if they throw you orally into a culture. If tomorrow they transplant you into Vanuatu, are you going to learn one of the closest local language of Vanuatu without any help? If you're a child, yeah. If you're an adult, you may not. But the big deal about ourselves is that as that capacity declines, our capacity rises to pick up a book and conjugate verbs and and see the exact translations of sentences and do it that way. So this is what creates our ability to learn languages forever. It may take longer. Definitely the mode changes. But so we are addressing, and you're going to hear a lot more on this, what happens after the sensitive period of being dumped into Bangladesh and learning Bangla, for example, versus me as an adult at age, 42, I have to go to Bangladesh for the first time, and now I have to learn Bangla from books. Big issue is the following. The implicit memory system calculates statistics, frequency statistics. We're not aware of them. We make our estimations on that basis, and that system seems to be operating maybe less well as we grow up, but we have to still decide on it and feed it the more correct, the more explicit information as we grow. If you hear repeated sentences time and again, you can reconnect them. And there is interesting research on how birds learn their songs, because whatever we do is from small chunks into little chunks. Now, this is what happens about how our memory works that takes stuff in. Our long-term memory, or a memory, is like the biggest bottle in the world. Imagine that this is the biggest bottle in the world. But you enter the conscious memory system, the declarative memory system, through a very, very, very narrow neck. This is our working memory. The working memory holds, according to the estimations of the 50s, which give some numbers, about 7 items if you don't know anything. If you do bigger chunks, and some people say smaller, but the 7 items, if you don't know anything, stand. The short-term memory is what actually keeps them in series. If you need to mix them up, and we always do, with knowledge that we have, that is the working memory needs to be done. So, for example, when you have this limited time space, you've got to execute within milliseconds. So you have something, for example, one item comes, it's got to pass that working memory bottleneck in order to find your cognitive networks, your memory networks, and sit there. If it goes too slow, it might fall out. This says something quite important. We need to process very fast. And see how fast. How many of you know the word digit span? I am going to tell you a series of numbers. Not these, don't get confused. I'm going to give you a series of numbers, and I want you to repeat them to yourself, aloud, whatever, forward. Then I'm going to give you a series of numbers to repeat backwards, which is the first. Forward tests the shorter memory, verbatim, what you hear. Backwards is the working memory. So, 6, 9, 2, 1, 7, 5, 0. Most people will manage that. What about you? Now, backwards. Oh boy, you're such a good crowd. This is scary. For those of you, actually, I was going to give you a whole different exercise for backwards, but you have this super educated young people here who do this, obviously. Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. Young people, have highly educated people today do marvels and, unimaginable for the older generation. But I'm going to give you the reverse digit span anyway to see. So you hear this, and you repeat backwards. 3, 8, 0, 4, 9, 5, 6. This is the capacity we need in order to learn, to remember languages. And this is where you see how, when we don't know anything, like these numbers are disconnected, we hear stuff in languages, the beginning it's disconnected. This is the bottleneck we face, and it's fairly severe. Some people are better than others. Some people will hold 1 or 2 seconds longer in working memory in their Einstein, but it's a terribly important situation. It says something, big implication. We need to execute rapidly. We need to understand rapidly. We need to bring into mind words rapidly in order to produce them. So comprehension, for example, maybe at the very least a word per second. So in the beginning, we don't hold very much. You hear, you're learning a language in the beginning, you say you do these conscious searches in order to figure out what the meaning is. And people say, bloop, 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 bloop. Working memory cannot do searches and contain the stuff. So we lose it. This is why CDs, all these audio files, need to be slowed down. How many of you find CDs in these normal speech that everybody produces? The idea is you understand natural speech. How many of you do you find them useful? See, it's few people, because they're too fast for the beginner who searches working memory, who needs all this. Very important, and a bad understanding of, misunderstanding of what it is that working memory needs to be done. Yes, people who are very good at languages, they have a few characteristics, one of which is higher working memory. The ability, like interpreters, and of course you can train it, you can hold like 25 seconds of what in short-term memory make precise translations do it. The other thing that how does the brain then get through when we see this limitation of working memory? How does the brain get through that stuff? Well, we have a chunking mechanism. If we take one small unit and we hear it 2 or 3 times with another small unit and another small unit, it comes together. Then that longer unit passes as one piece into working memory. That's why we need to learn basically word for word rather than larger situations. And chunking kind of works like this. If you know 2 words, you can attend like, how are you? Kalimera, τι κάνεις? Kalimera, okay, τι κάνεις, you could connect and memorize that. Okay, you have 3 words. You could connect the 4th one, καλά είμαι, εσύ, as they were teaching in Greek this morning. You could connect small chain, 1 more item, εσύ τι κάνεις. You can connect, τι γίνεσαι, πολύ καλά. But if someone tells you on day 1, kalimera, τι κάνεις καλά είσαι, someone had better break it up for you. Now, some of you are young and actually could process larger chunks, and highly educated, therefore your working memory may have been trained. But this doesn't last, unfortunately. We really are much better off doing word by word. And our brain does another thing in order also to facilitate entry into working memory. It takes analogies very well. In English, in reading, babi bu bebo, kaki ku keko, those reading strategies, which in English don't work, by the way, they work in transparent orthographies, you do that very well. And of course, with the dhamma fatahat, kasra in Arabic, you can do. Therefore, the implication is conjugations work. That is, learning to conjugate verbs gives you those analogies, and they're good for the brain. If you have a whole bunch of loose sentences, which is quite fashionable these days, your brain needs to calculate, it needs many more examples to calculate statistics when you're an adult. So it's much less efficient. You need more time, and it doesn't work very well. So the situation is this: sophisticated skills. In order for us to learn and produce a language in a reasonable time, and by the way, we need to have time and working memory left over to think what it is we're saying. We need to be very fast. We need to start with small chunks, connect them into bigger chunks, with practice, analogies and use them in audio that is slowed down enough. And the speed really, really matters. What happens, of course, as you practice is your reaction time goes down. These are standard learning curves that we can see in all skills, basically, all humans for all stuff, for all and capacities, kind of like that. So you are saying, you know, the word to get, I didn't come in Greek. Then irtha, okay, what did it mean? Oh, okay, this. The next time you hear it, okay, faster, faster, faster. So that you have this, after a while you level off. We need to overcome these initial slow reaction times, which needs to be done by, again, practicing enough times and starting from small chunks and hearing them faster. Now, another big thing from cognitive psychology is humans are set up to categorize. There are 3 types of verb conjugations in Spanish. Hablar, comer, ir, for example. You open those categories. Now the verbs that you know will fall into these. If someone say, well, there are 3, but, you know, or they didn't tell you anything. They say, here is adverbs. And then later they may say, well, this, okay, that sounded comer. Oh, okay, there are adverbs also. And dormir, you know, start discussing and here dormir, well, there are adverbs. You know, you need, again, many more exposures to calculate statistics in your brain. It's much more efficient to tell you up front what the categories are. We open the necessary categories, we file what comes very quickly and much more efficiently, which is why grammar helps. All of these various methods, that is like dialogues, they don't give you any grammar, they don't give you categorizations. They're good only after you know a language. Whatever you do, when you're learning something that starts with nothing, you need to go back to the more traditional grammars because this is what they are good at doing. You open your categories. Does this language have masculine, feminine? Does it have neutral? Does it conjugate verbs according to masculine, feminine? Does it conjugate verbs in how many categories? You open those categories, everything fits much more nicely. Then with analogies, another language that I know or you know, what are the differences? We make tables of differences. We need those analogies. You need to conjugate verbs and then apply them. And it's very nice if you can actually memorize them, which becomes harder with age for unfortunately good reasons. Because then you're able to take out from the memorized conjugation, blink, and put something in. Now, in the big bottle of our memory, there are cognitive networks. The various words, in a way, concepts are connected and linked this way. We can only remember items if they go and match somewhere. And it does make sense, and I think there was the whole discussion earlier about local languages, home languages. It's important that you know a subject, and then you can attach the relevant word. If you know the word justice in Hindi, you can attach the English, but if you have to regenerate the word justice, you never knew it, and they're not really telling you. They're letting you guess, like how many of these methods letting you guess. You have, again, you need much more time, many more samples in order to make sense, and people fall behind. Very important to all of this is the retrieval path. We encode in a certain, we build in whatever method you came, comes with a certain order, whatever that order is. We encode the language, or everything else, according to a certain order. We will retrieve it, find things according to that order. So, the most valuable item you language lovers own is your old textbooks. Old textbooks. If you have not spoken a language in 20 years and you need it now, don't go buy another, teach yourself Japanese. Find your Japanese books if you can. If you don't have at home, if you don't have the old ones at home, at least go find those on the internet and buy the old used books. You will save yourself a great deal of time. It's best, of course, if you do have them from home and you read your notes. And my most popular, most precious possessions that I have to save if my house burns down is like six bookcases of this old material. to which, frankly, I have digitized all the audio, and I've turned in the old material, the old textbooks into PDFs with my notes, because I want that retrieval path. Tomorrow, they say you go to Indonesia. I have not spoken Bahasa since 2006. Yes, I reviewed it. If I go to those books, my Bahasa will be back in shape in 4 or 5 days. If I take up some Teach Yourself Bahasa book, not in 21 days. Very, very important. There are many important ways and rules that what we learned. Items need to be imageable. They need to be, we remember more at the beginning and the end of a session. We remember again in small chunks at a time. Big issue is the reviewing intervals, which a lot of the language, the online, the apps have picked up. We get some effect of generated rather than just given words, but it may not be as it may not be as time efficient. For example, a Rosetta Stone that lets you guess. You may get a better retention effect, but then you waste time. If you have the intention to learn and identify with people, as we heard, I mean, you're quote unquote motivated, it's got to get done at a particular time, you are more likely to put more attention, encode more efficiently. Interesting is the situation of emotional connections. We are likely to remember both scary and funny material. So items that are happening in that particular, like the next 45 minutes before or after, may be remembered better, or they often are. So these expressive, emotional sounding audio tracks are much more memorable than a flat voice, John went to the house. It says, oh, he was a ghost of the centuries past. That's going to be remembered better. Very interesting. Boring documents, and very often language necessarily becomes a boring document, particularly the more advanced items. They're not, your attention wanders, but we have to also be able to deal with this. Imageable words are better imagined, what's called image superiority effect. Spaced review. Every time I see Marathi in 30 days, well, 15 days, 1 week after those 30 days, you will have forgotten everything. There is no way. Unfortunately, the way the biology of our memory is, it requires consolidation. So you've got to study some, and study the next, and then repeat some, and space it, and do something called interleaving, and do it over a longer period of time. Very important issues. And the interstudy interval should be 10-20% now if you want to remember in a year. There is a lot of this, and it works in some of the Pimsleur method. Dr. Pimsleur actually figured that out about in the 1960s, 70s, and it works. Some of the other methods have picked it up very well. But all of this also has this important thing, encoding specificity. We are set up as animals to remember items whenever we need them, not at all times. So what you will see is that you went to Malaysia and you spoke wonderful Bahasa, and now you're here 3 days later and your Bahasa isn't doing too terribly well because so much of this is encoded in place. You start getting on the plane, stuff will start, words will start coming to you. It's terribly important to understand again this, along with the retrieval path. How do we optimize these in our personal life to where when we want and when we need it, we optimize this? The result of the cognitive networks and the way they're set up, the more you know, the more you're likely to remember. If you studied Persian for 1 month 10 years ago, you may not remember much. Still, go to your old textbooks if you can find them. But if you took 5 courses of Persian, 10 years ago, you're going to be in much better shape because you had the chance to review, reconsolidate, mix together, contemplate, elaborate the context, your content, you're much more likely to remember this. These are the implications when we forget languages. The forgetting curves are the same as the learning curves. What you saw, you quickly forget something and it kind of levels off. Okay? And there is a problem in then saying, oh my God, I used to know it and forget it. Do not worry. again, as long as you have a bit of time and you keep your materials, you can do this. Because what happens is, when we're really in good shape, we can specifically retrieve an item. And some items we can recognize, okay, I don't remember. If you give me a list, a word, the word quickly, I don't know, in Bahasa, if you tell me a list now, I'll point it out to you. But a lot of that, it's also, oh my God, I don't remember it at all. I see it and I'm not sure I ever saw it. Yes, but the advantage still shows, because it's into implicit memory, in the number of tries it'll take to relearn it. So very important for all of you who try to keep all of these languages, is we don't necessarily have to do maintenance all the time. You will see the importance and the facility of relearning, particularly if you follow that retrieval path. So there are some cute things one can do. And it has to do, as you see, with the biology of memory, which is unrelated to what we do. It's related to what animals can do. Spaced reviews, as we said. Consolidation is very biological. Chewing gum. Has any one of you tried have you seen the chewing gum research, and has any one of you tried the chewing gum? About 30, multiple studies showed like a list of words, and you start chewing gum, it's about like a 36% improvement. Depends on how good you are. I'm not so sure. I've done it a few times. I'm not sure whether I get an advantage or not. Physical exertion. Again, Ellen, you were talking about a hula hoop. Where are you? That is significant. I ride my bicycle and listen to the tapes. But of course, I must have known them before and listen. And the physical exertion consolidates memory. It's really weird, but again, we're set up to remember where we ate, where we had to run away from danger if we had worked hard. Humor, again, 30 to 45 minutes before learning, you get like a 30% increase in recall, those emotional voices. This is weird, try it. Moving your eyes from side to side for 30 seconds, presumably it connects the two halves of the brain. It gets like a 10% advantage. So these are some of the things that are kind of weird, but show us also what happens. And very practical. Study, sleep, study again. Very, very important. Actually, it's quite a considerable advantage. Aside from this sandwich mode, and this research came out only like about 2 months ago, 10 minutes of restful waking, even if you don't rest just a little bit, it consolidates the memory. Big lesson, similarly, if you stop studying and close the book, don't start something else. Lie down, calm down for a while, and then your brain just wander. It's fine if you sleep again. Sleeping is good. But at the very least, let your brain wander. Don't get up and do something else. Significant improvements in consolidation. So again, we need fluency, automaticity as the goal of all training. Rapid, millisecond level performance. Not just for languages, but for everything else. Math, of course, reading. Chunks must start small, be learned gradually over time, then they become bigger chunks. In case you can't do them, you've got to remediate. You go into a class that goes too fast for you, you've got to spend time remediating. You don't just listen and get in and get absorbed and all that stuff. That's for children, maybe. But it seems to me, from what I see, that we need comprehension of at least 1 word per second. If you lose 1 word, you've understood pretty much. One word, you start your mind, your working memory gets wiped out. Any questions until now? Maybe because some of the stuff is intense a little bit. Okay. The implications of the memory research are quite severe. To begin with, it relies, as you see, very intensely on working memory, but we don't see our working memory. We're not conscious of it. So people completely disregard it and don't understand why they lose things in their mind, why they need speed so much. But we need to encode audio snippets. You can do it even after a few trials. In the beginning, the segments may be relatively meaningless, but we see the research from songbirds, if nothing else, that these get composed. If you hear enough items, with their grammatical glue, you actually may be able to speak out of them. You just need to do it enough times, whatever enough means, and there's personal variations, and you can actually speak out of them. Sometimes you need syntactical conversions, which means syntax, if you start reversing syntax order, el año nuevo versus the new year, it uses up your working memory. These are the basics that our brain needs to do this, particularly a very good working memory. And this is then what you should expect various methods to do. Teach small chunks, explain word for word, show you analogies, show you conjugations, even if you find them quote unquote boring. Give your brain a lot of statistical info, and if they opened categories that are explicit, then the statistical information fits nicely inside. And it takes you then less effort to collect statistics than loose, natural speech that we don't know you're going to hear next. A lot of audio. We humans rose to learn language from audio. There's no other way. We who have to now use our higher cognition, our complex cognition, still will get a great deal of benefit from audio, but it's got to be the audio that is the right speed for you at that particular moment. Slow down audio initially, basically. And of course, consolidation. You need a schedule of repeating vocabulary, and the better methods, of course, will try to give a schedule, not just mention words once and then leave them. This is now what creates problems for us as adults. Many important skills peak very early. All of this research, by the way, again, is available. But look what happens. Remembering short-term memory for stories peaks like at age 10. Word pair, something like age 12, it's ridiculous. The letter number sequences peak again before the teens. Word lists peak somewhere between, before the 20s. In short-term memory and in long-term memory. Not good news. This is what we need in order to learn consciously new languages. On the other hand, here are the better news. Vocabulary knowledge peaks like at age 60 or something, 65. Information, comprehension, they peak much later. Similarities we understand. Reverse lists we can understand. The more complex cognition that happens much more easily at higher ages. In fact, it doesn't peak until higher ages. And of course, you all are very educated. But those earlier peaks create a problem. When I was young, I could take a vocabulary list and read it a few times and speak out of it. Well, after the age 40, I noticed that I couldn't. I was on a plane to India. I would at least read the lists of words I had learned in the previous trip, so I review them in the plane. Then I go, and a few hours later it was the same thing. I didn't have any more recall of those lists. Then I understood, and I started going into audio. And I've been videotaping, and lately now with, of course, with digital, anything that I wanted that was significant, and then played it maximal times. Anytime I did classes, private, the World Bank gave us classes, private or small groups, I taped the teacher. And particularly segments that I needed with their translation. Then I went on bicycle rides and listened to them again. I have much equipment, but much of the old analog equipment does a better job. I have not yet seen apps slow down to where you actually hear it until your reaction time goes faster, drops, and then you can do faster. Which is why childhood strategies may not serve us in later years. And later years means like 35 and above. Younger people, and again, kids will remember, and many of you will still remember something. You hear it a few times, you remember it. Wonderful. It won't last. Talk to me 10 years later. You read it once, you took notes about it once, great. The trouble is, in our minds, the words run together. What was it? Oh, I forgot. And working memory, you guys, narrows down. Suddenly, or gradually, the last 4 or 5 years, I find it harder to both bring a language into working memory and have enough space to discuss the substance. And I'm often on high-level issues. So it becomes, weird. One has to actually perform that much faster, that much more automatically. Because, of course, what we want is automaticity. Automaticity, running these things together until you execute faster, takes the execution out of working memory into implicit memory to where you don't have to worry about it too much. And some of the grammatical rules in various languages for various people automatize faster than others, and some don't. And you still have to remember. And then that interferes with what you're saying, because I give, let's say, high-level speeches in Arabic. I've got to be able to have all my Arabic verbs, dovetailing correctly and do the correct syntax. It ends up being quite intensive. Interesting for me, as, again, we have to deal with this aging system, I remember a word, and I know what it means, but I don't know if it was Bahasa or Romanian. It's really weird. 19 languages, which include Greek, of course, run together very, it becomes a mess until you start clearing them out again. And in my age, I need to speak one. I don't want to hear Albanian and Bangla at the same time. If I'm in Bangladesh, I prepare for this and I speak and I do well. Don't talk to me in Albanian until I'm ready to do Albanian. You will see that these are essential memory issues, and rather than feel like one is joking or one isn't doing it right, we've got to get over them. We've got to understand what we can do at various ages. The ranges are large. You guys are much more educated. You have probably much better refined senses of some of these things, but it's very important still to understand what will happen to your language knowledge, your language learning capacity as you age, and how to maximize it. Because don't forget, the higher order competencies don't peak until much later. But given what we know from cognitive psychology, these are the more effective methods for, basically for everyone, but some of you will, again, be able to do whole sentences. Here is a Bahasa Method from the 70s, probably, maybe 60s, but the 70s. I don't even know the author, but it gives you a list of this is what it means, and then it applies these in a dialogue. This is basically the essential unit of what we should be looking for. Now, many of the methods you see on the market, they need to save space. They need to give to you fast. They also need to promise you fast. But you see, none of them is experimentally tested. So maybe 1 in 100 can do it. Most of them cannot. Most people cannot do it. You need to try and find such things, which often means finding older materials. And of course, we want audio too, which is a problem. But once you do this, then deliberately contemplate meaning. Make the encoding more distinct, because that's needed to maintain material in the cognitive networks and separate it from something else. Visualize the concrete object, what's called picture superiority effect. Create the sense of meaning for abstract something, I love you, See the sense like in Hebrew, habeit sheli or beiti, the same thing as in Arabic, beit-i. Try to create that, because it's not in the Indo-European languages that most of you tend to know. Experiment with the categorization. This is one interesting study. If you remember whether something is abstract or concrete, you may remember what they mean. And of course, every one of you understands, but doesn't understand why, packaging songs for long-term memory into songs. This is extremely important. A number of people think about it, but don't quite know why and don't do it right. The songs provide multiple cues as to the endings of what's going to happen. Sometimes they have weird syntax and weird words, by the way. But all this facilitates the recall. And in a way, it's the retrieval path that I told you. What we encode, we will retrieve in the sequence that we encoded. So the royal way to package a language for 15 years down the road is to learn a number of songs, 10, 15, whatever you can do. Learn them by heart, play them, if better, like them. Think about them, know every single grammatical item. And then you will see how they last through the decades. Incredibly important. the business of reviewing just before you forget. There is a fair amount of this. Again, it has to do with consolidation, but also because even if we learn new stuff, new words, and they won't be forgotten for a while, or if they need to, even they're temporary, we need them in order to process new text. So there are, again, review schedules, and it's important to try and review them. I completely arbitrarily say that you study the audio for at least 15 times. By now, I say 20 times. Fortunately, that doesn't take too long. Yeah, by the time I'm 80, it'll be 35 times. Fortunately, it doesn't take too long. So, for instance, to get back to this, and I think I have the audio for this. The way to do this is you read this, and you learn it, and you understand every one of these, and you get through the text 1 or 2 times. Then you listen. And again, slow down audio. Or you listen, stop at the very least, if you don't have slow down capacity at that moment. Stop, listen, think about it. The next time, your reaction time will be faster. But you take this and you listen to it, not 15 times today. You listen to it 4 or 5 times today, mixed in with the unit of yesterday, the unit of before yesterday. And tomorrow, you listen again to this 4 or 5 times, together mixed in with the units of earlier times. This is what's called interleaving. And yes, you will see that 15 times is nothing, and it is terribly important to do. How to slow down audio? This is a big issue because the old analog equipment has not yet been done, to the best of my knowledge, turned into apps. And I'm willing to even give a donation to an organization that will do the right app. Talk to me. This is Windows Media Player. You actually need to go and right-click on enhancements, then speed. And then you set that. I found reasonable to set it to 70%. You figure it out. Trouble is, this kind of a thing opens large spaces. You can at least use that by repeating. But otherwise, you can't really make use of all those wonderful audio files that are so available these days. And again, I'll come back to this. Memorizing conjugations. Again, because we open categories and we need analogies, we need to be able to do this. Then, if you do this, you're able to retrieve the right piece and insert it if you bring it into memory fast enough. And there is, again, research on this kind of situation because ordinal memory categories are learned more easily. We've seen all the greater importance of bringing in categories. It does get harder with age. Invent songs. Actually, what I would love to see in all of these languages is that are conjugated. I want to see conjugation songs. Whatever. This is Latin. Better set them in a tune. We try to see if we can get it to create a rhythm. I don't know Turkish, but I managed to, 10, 15 years ago, I memorized by inventing a song in Turkish to memorize numbers, which I play in my head because it doesn't look like anything I know. I don't know other URL-take languages. Again, record and rehearse. Whatever, if you're taking lessons, if you don't do this, they're lost into thin air. Record whatever is significant. You sit there with a recorder, and you record. Whatever the teacher said you want to retain. And better attach the translation, because you may forget later what it is and why you recorded it. And then you play it back. Otherwise, you end up spending money for these things that you don't get. So overall, this is what we see. Here is what we can see. Try chewing gum, try weightlifting, physical effort. This study, sleep study, is quite important. Space reviews is important. Audio. Mix up the items again. The book should be able, you repeat these from one day to the next, create interleaving, memorize songs, record and listen to classroom times. Visualize the acts to the extent that you can. And keep your older books to retrieve forgotten languages. For a few minutes, I'm going to deal with the issues of foreign scripts. How many of you learned to read a script that you did not know earlier? after age 18. Okay? If you were new Latin and you learn Greek or you learn Cyrillic, it's not terrible, a number of letters carry you. But those of you who did, and a number of course here are there, please tell me, do you see entire words coming at you, or do you see a jumble of letters? Yeah, some common items may come, but how many of you, after age 18, like you learned Hindi at age 25, you learned Arabic at age 30, what do you get? Do you see, a bunch of letters that you have to go letter by letter by letter, or do words effortlessly flash into your mind? That's interesting. I mean, I need to test you. Yeah, by the way, the kanji, for some reason, you either know them or you don't, and they have this effect. But if you do hiragana and katakana, they are the same situation. We seem to be essentially having great difficulties to automatize and see in parallel, automatically, entire words and scripts written past the age 18. And what happens is, at age 19, 18, 19, students go, let's say, from Greece to Israel, and they'll do all right. But they cannot, 30 years later, even cannot scan text, and they don't read for fun. There is some circuits somewhere decline in performance. A little bit the way they say there's a sensitive period for language among children. But you see the big difference. Sensitive period for language among children declines, but our ability to do higher order processing increases, rises, so we can do it. With scripts, I have not found a way. And it is a big problem, not for people like you and me, and we want to go and do Arabic and read the Arabic volume, but for billion illiterates and school illiterates who cannot do this. They learn, but they're stuck at the letter by letter by letter mode. Working memory cannot contain the message. By the end of a sentence, they forget the beginning. And then they give up. It becomes a hassle. Very important. Any one of you doing a doctoral dissertation, this is a doable experiment to do. Any one of you dealing with neuroscience, we need neuroimaging to understand where the problem is. I have done some research and I can give some reviews. But it's a big problem because what you can do if you don't read these very well is deal with dictionaries. You can deal with volume. Volume requires automaticity. It requires being able to see words, strangely, as if they were faces. Not pictures, but faces. This is a whole different lecture. But it's very important for you to understand. If you can't read automatically and fluently, do not be embarrassed. Unfortunately, it's normal. If you are in some minority that you have a huge visual word form and maybe it fits, count your blessings. Because you see, it's not just reading the typical script, you need to be able to read scribbling. That is possible only after we get to the point of recognizing words as if they were faces. Otherwise, by the time you say nachla and where does this and that, where does the nun and then where does the chaf end, your working memory's been wiped out. And that is the problem. Try, for all of you, to look at the new letters intensely and for quite a while. Don't just give a glance. Give it 10 seconds. And pronounce it, loud or sub-vocabulary. Ha. Try to see if you can add some emotion. Ha. That kind of stuff. See if that should help a bit. But I have not found a way really to get anywhere really close to what we can do with parallel processing when we are children. I wonder if any of the brave of you tries transcranial magnetic stimulation. You did? Okay. Because it's one thing about language. I mean, this is being sold as a panacea, and by the way, we really don't know what it does to the brains. But I would like to see about reading automaticity of, again, of unfamiliar scripts in adulthood, if this can work. To get back and try to finish earlier, We get, of course, and we all see, help from technology. But then what matters and what's not, there's no research behind it. The old material that did the work best is completely obsolete, gone, and I can't find it and can't buy it, and I've paid, hidden money to somebody who claimed to send this to me, all kind of stuff. Because what you need is, this was a tape recorder with digital memory. You hear something, it just went too fast, you didn't understand, you push a button, recording stops, and what you hear is a loop, endless number of times of the last, let's say, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, whatever you want, in a slow down mode, repeating those units you missed. And remember, I was telling you what really matters is those small units. So in a slow down mode, infinite times repeating units. This I have not seen anywhere. Yes, you can do it on computer. I showed you in Windows Media Player, but this I can take to the park and I can walk and read. I cannot take the computer. Other apps are simply not as good as that. Again, whoever wants to develop these, talk to us. I think there's also a market when people understand why these work so well. The Chinese basically abandoned them. This is what the word language repeater referred to. Any one of you who understood this. We also want conjugation apps in real time. I have the Russian. I have Russian. Interestingly, I have Romanian from 15 years ago. We want, and we do get by now, dictionaries. And you want offline dictionaries, and you see a lot of them. And by the way, you can download for free a whole bunch of them that come with apps. You want to be able to flip from one to the other, and only a minority of them do that. I have in my pocket like 18 dictionaries by Ectaco. They're not the best, they'll do for most things. Ellen, unfortunately, we still need those big books. They have not been replicated. But this is still an area where development is needed, given that we need those small units in the slow down mode. Now, you have seen, and we have here Mango, of course, which is wonderful efforts to do these. And all of you have seen Duolingo, Yabla I haven't seen too much, Candy Crush, Memorize, and then the Evel Knievel of Rosetta Stone, and the wonderful Pimsleur. Very quickly, how many of you are familiar with Pimsleur? Okay. For the languages that it exists, it's very, very efficient. It doesn't teach you much, but it gets you to automatize those small units. And you see how it gives 25, it gives you a, 3-minute dialogue. Usually, a woman tries to pick up men in a hotel, which is ridiculous. But anyway, I ignore that because that's what I get in Albanian, okay? And then it breaks that up into small units. And by the way, I don't know why he thought that to put the end backwards, but never mind, that's not so bad. At the end of 25 minutes, you know and understand every one of these, and you'll remember, and then they build on it. By definition, they can't cover too much text. And when you start getting into like Russian, they cannot really do grammar very well. They can teach you a whole lot of Russian. I've been through the 3 levels very nicely. But you have to have a grammar book to understand when they're introducing instrumental and dative and all that. But these are the situations. We have to start from various methods and move on. If Pimsleur exists, start with Pimsleur. You just need to move on after that. Acquire the automaticity of the small units they give you, the fluency, move on. Rosetta Stone tries to make you guess. It's not worth it. They did wonderful marketing. They also are pressuring people not to sell Rosetta Stone, for example, in eBay. Do not ever mess with this. It's not worth it. And it's, by the way, you're stuck with a computer. You can't take it outside. These are various versions that are quite interesting because you get into the gamification. And there was a discussion upstairs in French a little bit earlier. I see that the encouragement they provide is quite important. I started Dutch in Memorize or Duolingo, and they keep pestering me. You haven't practiced today. That's great. Yes. They also say, gee, you made it. You won 366 points. I'm not of that generation. I don't know what to do with the points. But, but they are good. Yeah, I can't get fooled. I'm too old to get fooled with this kind of stuff. But they are good at taking up these things. At the same time, they're not very good and cannot be on grammar. They try to replicate speech. Mango, which is, again, I congratulate the people who do this, Lily and everybody else. They try to develop natural language. What do you need in a situation? Fine for the beginning. But again, we need the classifications of grammar in order to move. So for the beginning, they're fine. When you have things like Arabic, Cyrillic, Lao, Hindi, whatever, they are actually quite good at grammar. I loved an app that presented me constantly with kanas, Japanese kanas, hiragana and katakana. Boy, that facilitated things. And they wouldn't let me finish because the next kana comes, and the next kana comes, you have to keep clicking. Wonderful way. But these are, on one hand, these are the small initial units. On the other hand, you need to rise after that. And with the apps, the medium is limited. You can only do so much. By the way, this is really neat, what they can do. This, I think, is it Duolingo? Select the boy. There are so many cues. You really don't know, which is the problem also of Rosetta Stone. These are much better in actually teaching you something you may remember. But again, the medium is limited. The minute you start needing more volume, that's all they can do. So, yes, again, all of these are in the beginning very helpful. But they have these issues that, again, we can't get over with very easily. Content is necessarily limited. Huge, big phrases, by the way, in all of these, phrase books, they're big chunks. You cannot start from them unless you have wonderful, memory of 18-year-olds. It's a whole lot better to use those materials after you learn, as consolidation, extra practice, etc. Big issue that I have, the amount of time you spend navigating graphs and clicking and doing gives you very few stimuli per minute. So you can really waste your time, and I think Ellen brought this up again earlier. You really, unfortunately, there is a time waste factor in all of this motivational material. And finally, they may create an illusion of knowledge. You think you know because you spent 20 hours, but what you really know is the first 2 pages of an old-style textbook. That's the problem. Again, this is a very cute kana app. Okay, I need to choose it, but what if it's not one of these that I confuse it with? You can only do so much. The traditional courses, teach yourself whatever, and a zillion other things. The older ones were more word by word. The newer ones, they need to save money. And again, nobody has tested them. And it's what a native speaker thinks about progression. So many of them are not terribly usable. They do have audio. So what do you do if you do a language for which there isn't enough, like Swahili? Well, Swahili, there hasn't been. You've got to study one text, get another text. When it starts getting harder, jump to third text if you can find it. Then you jump to the first text again. It's unfortunately necessary for languages that do not have many materials. Very important, however, these old Teach Yourself series and various other things, they have tapes and they have audio. Tapes can be digitized. If you go to eBay and you find these materials and they have tapes, fear not, you take your MP3 player, you digitize them. It's because then you can have them. Don't worry. By the way, a whole army of volunteers has digitized tapes and put them online. These are, by the way, the list of languages that Pimsleur does. To me, the secret treasure for everybody, Foreign Service Institute courses, 1960s. They're all free online. And this is the list that you get. They have been put together, again, by volunteers. I contributed the Bangla, and I resuscitated Chichewa, which I had picked up, and then the site went down, and I had all the Chichewa. You can go download them anytime. Those are tapes that have been digitized. Courses are, again, word for word for word, that kind of setup. They may be too boring for you young people. We had to do conjugations, we had to do these repetitions and all of this boring stuff. I'm very tolerant of these. You know, it doesn't make me jump up and down, but if I've got to perform in 3 weeks, I've got to do this. Now, if you're a recreational reader, you may not like it, but you've got to get on with the job. That's what it is. Right now, fsi-languages.yogic.eu, and that's where you will find also the Department of Defense, US Department of Defense, DLI languages, similarly, with more military technology, a terminology, and a lot of items. I personally thank, and I try to keep the tradition, to all the volunteers who digitized the old tapes. Just 2 days ago, I put an old Malagash, an old Sinhalese textbook from 1977 that I had requested someone to read to me. So not only does the book exist online, there, the digitized tape existed. I digitized it a few weeks ago. I found the old tape. Peace Corps materials, not very good. They're big chunks, very cursory. You can use them, however, as you're learning a language, to weave those in and get extra practice. For intermediate levels and above, everyone's into, elementary. What happens next? A big problem. And what do you get with audio? For years, there used to be the Champs-Élysées. How many of you are familiar with the Champs-Élysées series? It's died down into lawsuits and bankruptcies, and it's a horrible situation because they were doing so well, they started fighting, the various relatives started fighting over it, because you had Acquarello Italiano, you have Shawin's Land, and you have the Puerta del Sol. Incredible stuff. But by now, there is a newer company whose name I don't remember that does this. What you get is a text, and audio, and maybe video these days. Disregard the video. What you need really is the audio, because then you have songs with their lyrics. You learn the songs and the lyrics, you package the material for long-term memory. But you have a vocabulary list, and if you spend the time, if you're driving, for example, if you're taking the train, this is excellent material to take. I will teach a seminar in Italy next Saturday. And I would need to spend a few hours, 2 or 3 hours at most maybe, listening to some of the Acquarello Italiano that I have with me in order then to prime the brain to produce Italian and not Spanish, which is likely to produce, in order to actually do the seminar in Spanish, in Italian. Where am I? All of that. Treasure, lost treasure for everybody. These Dunwoody Press, does anybody know newspaper readers of unusual languages? They had newspapers, sometime of the 70s, never mind what they say. All of this stuff, do not worry what they say. 1960s, who is the chief of your village? It doesn't matter. Just learn the grammar. The grammar has not changed. Sometimes the word use may change, but that's minor. Dunwoody Press. Google it, you will see the incredible variety. Unfortunately, they went out of business, or they were bought out, I don't know, a few years ago. The thing is, they came with tapes and audio. I managed to find the Malagash, and I managed to find the CDs of Malagash, and I uploaded them. I uploaded the audio for common use. Again, if you're getting serious at the advanced stage, you will find Swahili in 2 levels. Of advanced and more advanced. You will find Nepali. You will find Romanian. What else do I have? Unfortunately, I haven't seen anything rivaling the Dunwoody Press newspaper readers with its audio for independent study. Now, you can tell me you can do everything on the internet. Maybe, but I don't see it. So, the memory functions give us guidance on what to do. Unfortunately, the language content needs to flow through our working memory. We need to speak, read, understand in milliseconds. We cannot escape that. We are prisoners of our working memory. From ever on, if you remember anything from this presentation, remember that you've got a limited working memory. Then you've got to speed up, practice, repeat, learn those, and get the grammar down in categories so that it will come most efficiently in your mind and with fewer tries to move the statistical calculations of your brain. So start with apps, or if Pimsleur if available in one of these, particularly the harder to find languages. Get books with recorded texts. By books by themselves, they're not terribly useful, or if you can't, get someone to record them on tape. I've done this multiple times. Study the grammar and vocabulary. Spend most of the time listening and repeating, but knowing where something belongs. Listen to texts at least 15 times. Again, interleaved with other texts to where you have this ready recall into your working memory, and then you can compose a sentence out of this. And by the way, don't worry if you make mistakes and if your accent is lousy, don't worry about that. Distinguish every single word. We need to know its meaning. See if you can try exercise, lifting, but you need to know the material. Lifting weights, interestingly, riding bikes, doing a hula hoop, whatever it is that actually will move our ability to retain material better when we have physical effort. Maybe chewing gum if you sit down. Study for 20 minutes, let's say. Take a break for 10 minutes. I haven't told you about that. Study again. Or study, sleep, study. Good consolidations. Mix new text with reviews again. And maybe have a good laugh about 45 minutes after studying. Thank you.